Hey everybody, I want to share something with you real quick. So I introduced Plato to you not too long ago, and as Plato, as we know, him, Anaxagoras, also Socrates, all these guys a long time ago, they were famous for talking about what's called mind, and mind actually turns out to be the demiurge. Because it is the first thing born from the infinite, or from the world of archetypes. And mind is actually what creates the cosmos. And in the previous videos that I've shown you, that is clearly tied to, and we have images showing that the demiurge is tied to the Orion Nebula. Now, why is this also important when we talk about Plato and Greece and things like this? Because if we want to go back to the very first source of all this, we have to go back to the ancient Hermetic literature. And the reason why we have to do this is because the Greeks, Plato and guys like this, Plato actually visited Egypt to learn about the mysteries. And he went to Sais to learn about the mysteries. They brought that back over to Greece. And then, of course, now we have Plato talking about mind, universal mind, the demiurge, the cosmos, and things like this. So what's important to realize here is that although Plato and these guys covered it, where they really got their information from was ancient Egypt. So that's our real source here, is ancient Egypt. Well, let's listen to what Manly Hall has to say. These are some clips that I've taken from it, and there's one very interesting part that I found where he's not forthcoming about the tomb of Hermes and this great body of Hermetic literature. But he is in the initiation of the pyramid. Now, the reason this is important is because we're going to see that the reason he didn't want to tie this together was because of the as above, so below principle that we're going to take a look at. Let's listen to what he has to say.
We have the most learned persons over a period of perhaps 1,800 years in violent disagreement. Each of these positions has been taken with skill. Most of the authorities have done everything in their power to ferret out the facts. When we say everything in their power, we place certain provisions. For it is not in the power of any person to go completely against conviction. And most of the erroneous opinions that we have in life arise from prejudice, from some bias or limitation by which it is impossible for us to think clearly and freely and to examine all facts upon their own merit alone. We are conditioned by our living, by our thinking, by our education and our environment. And these conditioning factors move in upon our thinking and frequently distort it. Therefore, if a person researching in some field belongs to a school that has strong prejudices, he has already lost his own freedom of thinking, his own individual directive.
Amen.
This we evidence from the appearance of the Septuagint version of the Bible, which was actually prepared in Greek, in Egypt, probably in the middle of the 4th century B.C. Therefore, to say that Greek could not have originated in Egypt prior to the 4th century A.D. is no longer a tenable hypothesis. Also, we have another interesting point, one that we cannot overlook. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone gave us our first real clue to the Egyptian language. And it is important to us because it is a bilingual inscription in Egyptian glyphs and in Greek. Now, this is important to us for two reasons. First, because this stone was cut or prepared approximately 200 B.C. The second point of interest is that this stone actually carries the name of Hermes. It is one of the words, of course, in the Egyptian form, thoth. But it also carries another very interesting peculiarity by which we divide the Egyptian Thotic literature from the true Hermetic structure. We most of us realize or remember that Hermes is generally referred to in the Hermetic writings as Mercurius or Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice greatest. And in some of the earlier works, this is modified a little, and he is called the twice greatest. But always this peculiar appellation of more than great accompanies the peculiar use of the term in the Hermetic literature. On the Rosetta Stone, the reference to Thoth is Thoth, great, great. In other words, twice great. And this carries with it an implication that is so close to our Hermetic problem that we cannot ignore it.
Now, this is the part right here. Okay, so the Rosetta Stone, okay, they mention Thoth, and Thoth, they mention him as Thoth Great Great, which is the same as Thoth Twice Greatest. So we can see that there is a connection between Hermes, Trismegistus, and Thoth. Okay. But now here's the interesting part here. So in the great body of Hermetic literature, and he mentions this as above, so below, and I'm going to switch back into between the two so that you can see what he didn't mention here, but what he does mention in the initiation of the pyramid. This makes a very important connection that we need to see. And this is going to play into a future video that I'm going to make regarding, it's going to be the last one in the series of the Orion Nebula powers our sun. It's going to be the last one of that series. So I'm going through this here real quick to kind of give you guys an education up front of what's going on here between Greek and Egyptian. Listen to this right here.
Long ago it is said that Alexander the Great, while king of Macedonia, went out into the desert to visit the tomb of Hermes, a tomb which has apparently disappeared from our present knowledge, although there are reported locations for it even now.
Okay, so it's not known where it is, okay? But I caught him, because here in the initiation of the pyramid, listen to this.
Now Hermes and several of the others, and people of the Alexandrian period, like to consider the Great Pyramid as the tomb of Hermes.
So as we can see, so it's the Great Pyramid that's the tomb of Hermes. But in the other one, he mentions that there are reports of where it is, but we don't know exactly where it is. But the reason why he did that is Manly Hall never has come out and said anything particular about the Orion Nebula or anything. And I believe that the reason he does this, and he gives so much other information, is because he wants people to go out and research it themselves. He wants people to discover the information for themselves. So, as we can see in the initiation of the pyramid, it's clearly called the Tomb of Hermes. So now I'm going to go ahead and let these two play through for you, and you can see now why this first one, when he starts mentioning the as above, so below, and the Tomb of Hermes, which is actually the Great Pyramid, we're going to see that Manly Hall actually knew that the pyramids were mirroring something in the sky a long time ago.
Long ago it is said that Alexander the Great, while king of Macedonia, went out into the desert to visit the tomb of Hermes, a tomb which has apparently disappeared from our present knowledge, although there are reported locations for it even now. Opening this tomb, he gazed down upon the great sage of the past, whose body and bones had moved to ashes. But he saw among the ashes the great emerald tablet, known as the Emerald Table of Hermes, which contained upon it the great Hermetic inscription, which opens with the rule or law or statement, which has since become world famous: that which is above is like unto that which is below. That which is below is like unto that which is above. This parallel.
That's going to be really, really important when I start showing you the last video in the series, because what he's now shown is that he knows that the Great Pyramid was the Tomb of Hermes. He didn't want to introduce it here to let you know the as above, so below related to the Great Pyramid. Okay, so he knew about this relationship between the heavens and the earth a long time ago. And I'll just play a little bit more of this for you here.
Created the entire concept of medieval science, a science based upon the similarities of things, the idea of macrocosm and microcosm, that the universe was the great man and man the little universe.
And we know that we've seen that before in what I've shown you so far. The macrocosm being the mind, which is what Plato focuses on in most of his information, the cosmic mind, the demiurge, and what Hermes is actually referring to in his vision called the Vision of Hermes, where he speaks to the Pymander, which is actually the mind. So this is all related to mind. When we go all the way back into Plato and before, we see that all the way back into the Hermetic literature, which was actually taken over by the Greeks and brought back into Greece, everything is related to mind, and mind is related to the demiurge, and the demiurge is related to the Orion Nebula.
And while we have theoretically outgrown much of this thinking, as Thorndike explains it, it is still true that the law of analogy is operating in our lives every day as a force in our thinking, and is also a powerful instrument of scientific research within certain limitations.
And I will be showing you that later. However, it does go into a little bit of metaphysics, and it also goes into the same concepts that we see from Plato, which he more than likely learned from ancient Egypt, which is regarding the world of ideas and forms, patterns, and archetypes being used to construct the universe or the cosmos. So it gets into a little bit of metaphysics. However, we should understand that metaphysics is simply science that is not yet understood. And so what we will clearly see is that this world of forms and archetypes, which is actually used to construct the universe or the cosmos, or even our little cosmos, is all based on a certain archetype, and that particular archetype is the archetype of the mind.
So the Hermetic concept of analogy stands out in a strange intensity. We can probably trace the thinking to earlier periods and far places, but the statement, the bringing together of the idea, and its clarification seemingly was part of the Hermetic tradition. Thus we have analogy and mentalism coming out. We have the Hermetic work emphasizing that a man is what his mind is. That if his mind has experienced its re-identity with God, man is God. That mind, like the later quicksilver of the Hermetist, that mind absorbs all things into itself and transforms them. That it is the agent which can never cease functioning until all opposites have been reconciled. Now we also know that one of the introductions which we find in the Hermetic writings is this important approach to the concept of mind. Now we know that Plato, Pythagoras, and Aristotle seemingly rather well exhausted our concept of the human mind. Yet in the Hermetic writings and in the Hermetic corpus, we find some new aspects of mentalistic thinking. We know, for example, that in most of the Greek schools, mind became an instrument. It was a wonderful and powerful means for the accomplishment of truth. Mind was therefore a kind of channel through which knowledge moved into the individual. We know that in the 6th century BC, nearly all Greek scholars visited Egypt. We know that Pythagoras received a large part of his education from the Egyptians. We know that Plato visited Egypt, receiving the mysteries at Sais. We are perfectly well aware that Solon, in the 6th century, went to Egypt. And there he became instructed in the principles of laws, which he later reformed and applied to the needs of the Athenian states. All of these considerations must cause us to realize that Greek philosophy was indebted to Egypt. Yet in Greek philosophy we do not find the elements of the Egyptian religion which flourished at the time of Pythagoras or Plato. Is it possible, then, that the return of Greek philosophy to Egypt about the time of the rise of the Hermetic literature was more than a coincidence? Is it at all conceivable that Pythagoras and Plato and Solon and others who made the same, at that time, difficult journey actually received a teaching different from that of Orthodox Egyptian religion, and that in the mysteries of this teaching they derived the principles of their own Greek system? If this is true, then there is no reason to doubt that the Hermetic tradition in Egypt, which in many ways is similar to the Greek, might well have been older than the Greek, and might have been communicated to those Greeks who later fashioned the Platonic and Peripatetic systems of philosophy, or even the Stoical and Cynical schools. There is every reason, then, to assume that being without knowledge of the actual facts involved, and having only circumstantial evidence upon which to build, we cannot preclude the possibility that the Egyptians did possess the rudiments of Hermetic philosophy earlier than the rise of Greek philosophy. This would seem to be more probable inasmuch as the Greeks borrowed from the Egyptians at a time when the Egyptians were not borrowing from the Greeks. In those days when Solon visited Egypt, the Egyptian priests referred to the Greeks as children, infants in learning, and Solon was inclined to agree with them and recognized the tremendous value of being allowed to become acquainted with the Egyptian system of law and political structure.
So as we can see, more than likely the Greeks, people like Plato, Socrates, these kinds of guys, Plato was introduced into the mysteries. And so more than likely, since Plato's main focus was around mind, the cosmic mind, the demiurge, which we now know, we've actually seen from very clear images when we see the picture of the demiurge, the Yaldabaoth, when we hear about Yahweh, which is also equated to Yaldabaoth. We hear about all these things across cultures and the descriptions of them that in detail that I've already shown you so far inside these other videos related to the area that powers our sun. Now we know what's being referred to here. Now the as above, so below principle that he didn't want to tie in this particular video to the pyramids, probably wanted people to search that out and find it out for themselves. But I caught him.
Long ago it is said that Alexander the Great, while king of Macedonia, went out into the desert to visit the tomb of Hermes, a tomb which has apparently disappeared from our present knowledge, although there are reported locations for it even now.
Now Hermes and several of the others, and people of the Alexandrian period, like to consider the Great Pyramid as the tomb of Hermes.
So I don't know if he knew that somebody was going to catch that, but obviously he doesn't know that he's got a huge fan that loves his work. And when you start comparing all this stuff together, so you can see he actually knew. Now, the whole concept behind all this brings us back to mind again. And mind is related to the bigger universe, which is the cosmic mind. And that relates to the demiurge on one scale. And even if we go beyond that scale, if we want to take a look at, say, the whole universe that exists, the whole universe that exists would also be made of the same archetype, the same pattern that we see that the Orion Nebula is made of. And this has to do with the archetype of the human mind. But what the Egyptians were actually pointing us to with the pyramids is they were pointing us to the Orion Nebula. They were pointing us to this mind. And that is related to Thoth. It's also related to Osiris, because we have to think about emanations when we think about this stuff here. We have the Eye of Osiris representing the trapezium of the Orion Nebula, but we see that the whole nebula itself is being more related to Horus and things like this, and we have the invisible world of the archetypes versus the visible universe. So that's the reason we see all of these names. And then of course we have, over time, we have a changing of these names, whether it be from one culture to the next. But we can see that the descriptions and everything that is supplied to us among all of these cultures relates us back to the Orion Nebula. And when we take a look at the capstone of the pyramid itself, no matter what else it may be, the precision of the way it was built and the mathematics behind it and everything else was to present us information. Because as we know, the way the pyramid is built, where it's located on the earth, the knowledge that's contained behind it, like the knowledge of the solar system and all these other things, it was done this way to show us something. And inside the initiation of the pyramid, it is mentioned that the pyramid was the symbol of universal mind. When we take a look in the pyramid texts, we see that Osiris is the construction of the pyramid is Osiris. And when we take a look at Osiris, Osiris is the one who's carrying the stars. And remember, when people died, they wanted to become a star in the area or the kingdom of Osiris, and that is the area of the Orion Nebula. So it all ties us back to the Orion Nebula. And the whole as above, so below principle is important, because where they place those pyramids, and what we see as the Nile Delta, will show us that there is this particular archetype, which is the archetype of the mind that was used to first create the Orion Nebula. But then, even in the Kabbalion, we'll go over some of that as well, but even in the Kabbalah, we see that these two areas, being Kether, which represents the nebula, and Malkuth, which represents the earth, that one is like the other. And if we take a look inside the old emerald tablet, that his father is the sun, his mother is the moon. When we take a look at all of the images of the demiurge, we always see the demiurge standing in between the sun and the moon. So it all relates back to the Orion Nebula. We'll cover that more in the last video that I have regarding the Orion Nebula powering our sun. Y'all take care, but I wanted to tie this together to you. I wanted to show you that the Greeks actually owe their philosophy to the ancient Egyptians, because they went there and studied that, and it all is based around mind, and mind is based around the demiurge, and the demiurge is the Orion Nebula. So you guys take care, and I'll talk to you soon.